That's right. Hey, everyone. Welcome into the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, who is currently battling a head cold. And we were just laughing at the dulcet tones of my
Your
raspy radio
smooth
voice.
radio by the head cold.
Right. Today, I am excited to bring you a conversation with Scott Moon. Scott and I have been friends for, I don't know, close to 10 years, it feels like,
Yeah.
and finally got to stand in Scott's presence in real life last week at Author Nation. And we
Is that
didn't
the
get to
first
hang
time we
out
met
as
in person?
that's the first time that we've met in person.
See, it
It,
feels like we've
yeah.
met in person before, but you're right, that was.
That was, but, and, I was only in, Vegas for about 48 hours. It was, a rush in and rush out situation, but, you know, finally got to connect with everybody, and anyway, Scott is, an author that has such a fascinating personal story. I love talking with Scott, and, when I first met Scott, he was a bivocational author, like so many
I
of
love
us
it.
are. He had a day job, sometimes a night job. You worked pretty crazy hours for a while with the police
Yeah.
force, and you juggled that full-time career, and it was a well-decorated career, um, and the life of, what seemed to be a full-time author, and you juggled those 2 things because you were passionate about both. And,
Oh, yeah.
with us 2/3 of the way through our writing challenge, NaNoWriMo month, I thought, what a better person to talk to about, kind of juggling all the things, pursuing your passion while also, keeping the wheels on, with a family and, all the things that you have to do. So, anyway, welcome to the show, Scott.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here. I always love talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. For we've got a number of people in the live chat. Paula, good to see you. NJB, Valentine, so many great folks joining in. Happy to see you all here. If you have any comments or questions for Scott or me as we do it, just post them in the chat there, and we'll try to get to them. But for folks that are not familiar with you, Scott, one question I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller? Because I know it goes way back for you. When did you first dream of being an author?
I think the first time was I was probably in like third grade or something, and I wrote a short story for class, and it was one of the first and probably the only standout performance of my academic career. I was pretty average, going through school, but I remember my teacher was complimentary of it, and she's probably latching on. I got to say something nice about this kid. I'm going to do that at the parent teacher conference. But I remember it was some sort of vaguely Jetson inspired future story, but I felt really good about that. Around that time, I also kind of developed my love of journals and writing. I like get I was fascinated by the idea of like a blank notebook, like a journal,
Yeah,
like they have them everywhere now. But back then, I was like, because in my little kid's head, I was like, if I write it into a book-like thing, then it will be a book, and you can sell. That thing. That's where I was at when I very first started, and I got positive feedback from my parents and people about creativity in general, and it really kind of started from there.
yeah. Were you always a science fiction fan?
Yeah, yes, I liked everything, and I still do. And I didn't. One of my things I always remember the most not wanting to be growing up was bored. I didn't want. I just hated being bored. Was like the worst thing ever. And you had limited options back then, and so basically, daydreaming leads very naturally into writing. If you have the
Yeah,
right encouragement. So it kind of came that way.
right.
Yep.
One of the things that I love to talk to people about is the circuitous route that a
Mhm.
lot of us take to coming to the author life. And you know, I've done over 1,700 author interviews in the last decade, and I can count probably on one hand the number of people that being an author was their sole pursuit in life. You know, they finish high school, they go to college, get an MFA, and they immediately start working in publishing, and that's the only thing they ever did. For the vast majority of people, we come over to this job and we pick up some experience. We you know, have an experience with this thing that we volunteer with or whatever it is, and all of the things that we involve ourselves with build that author toolkit, whether we intend for them to or not. They're things that you
Mm.
can reach in and you can pull experiences out that you
Yep.
lean on. You also are a musician. I know you play guitar and bass. I think.
I try. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I also dink around. But one thing that is helpful for me if I'm stuck on something, I'll grab a guitar off the wall and I'll just start noodling around and playing through
Mhm.
chord progressions of things that it, it's a different part of my brain. It seems like that when I start kind of falling in there, it frees up a part of my brain to untangle story knots sometimes. That
Well,
your
music has structure like
yeah,
writing, but it also has improvisation like
yeah,
writing, especially when you're doing the discovery. At some point, no matter how much you plot, you got to be a little bit of discovery writer. So that's it. I think they are probably very good, well related. What
yeah.
you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, I was just gonna say that does does your musician brain is is it is it the same muscles as your writing brain, and do you feel like one feeds the other in any way that is maybe not obvious to people?
I think it's a great way to kind of maybe be in the storytelling mode without words.
Yeah,
Unless you're writing lyrics or something. So it kind of is a palate cleanser.
yeah,
I think that's really important sometimes to kind of step back, keep do the exercise, kind of recovery workout for your brain type of thing. It can be very
yeah,
useful.
gotcha.
Yeah.
You first started writing and publishing before this whole Kindle revolution happened,
Yes.
and self-publishing became a viable, uh, outlet for people. What was your entry to, back before the days when, uh, if you wrote a book, like what do you do with it? Like, how did you start pursuing getting published and taking these story ideas that you had and bringing them to the world?
You learn to read every year. You go pick up the writer's market at your bookstore and page through it, decide if you could afford to spend $40 on it and if that was a good idea or not. And
Right.
then spend hours combing through looking for publishers or agents that would accept your manuscript and all the guidelines. And did a lot with that. Before that, I started writing and eventually learned the process, how to write a query, how to submit things, how to send things off, which publishers required or allowed simultaneous submissions, whether they wanted the complete book or the first three chapters, and that was quite a process. I did that for a long time before the Kindle revolution. Um, one book I submitted that got the farthest, the entire turnaround process was 7 years.
Mhm.
So I submitted the book. I got some good feedback. They said it went around to the next. It was submitted to Tor, I think, and they were is it a Tor or DAW? I can't remember. I have I laminated the letter I got back eventually, but they said, yeah, okay, it's going to the next round, and then if it gets past that, it's going to go to the purchasing editor. And I was so excited, and that was so about you read all the books on how to get into the business, and they're like, don't be pushy, but you got to stay in touch. So like every 6 months, I would write them a letter because it was kind of early email. Sometimes I would email,
Oh,
but it was definitely a physically submitted copy of my book. And so about every 6 months, I would kind of send them a tentative little carefully researched letter. And about a year and a half went by, and I'd gotten that last thing where they were thinking about it. And then I kind of forgot about it because I was like, I just think that we're done. Well, 7 years later, I got something in the mail and said, "Hey, We really did like this. And they said a lot of positive things. They had some feedback on it. We think you should keep writing, but it's not for us. And I was like, 7 years.
It's 7
And most
years.
of, yeah. And what made it hard was at the time, almost every publisher I submitted to said they do not accept simultaneous submissions. And I'm kind of a rule follower. And so I would send something off to a agent or a publisher and wait. And like, I can't wait that long. You can't make any progress like that.
Right. Right.
So it's crazy.
Especially, yeah, there's only so many science fiction publishers that like
Yeah.
there's not like 1,000 that you can just keep submitting to.
Yeah. And
Wow.
nowadays I would just submit to everybody I could. And then if I had to tell somebody no, somebody else already took it, then I guess that's a good problem to have in the future.
Right. Right. What did your family and friends think as you're going through this process? Was there input from them? Were there people around you encouraging you? What was your support system like?
It's always a mixed bag. So my mom was an English teacher and an educator in general. My dad was a farm manager and also an educator. Um, everybody in my family works 3 jobs for some reason. It's like a sickness, but
Right.
but so when I was about 12, my mom said we should write a book for kids your age, and that was kind of before genres had really solidified into, middle grade books and young adult stuff. And so I started writing on this book on a legal pad, and we worked on it together for a while. But that's when I decided I want to write for a living. Now there were some other trails taken between then and now
Yeah.
because it,
Yeah.
it took a minute. But yeah, I got pretty serious about it. So I had a lot of support. But the thing is, even with support, like, I got married, my wife knew I was a writer and stuff, but nobody in my friends, but they didn't really understand the full intensity of it
Right.
until it started to get real. And then they were like, and clearing that up was actually a big step forward in my relationship with my wife, where we got on the same page. Like, one,
Mm.
she understood how important it was to me, and I understood that I shouldn't feel guilty about my writing time because she was okay with me going off and disappearing while I was writing, mostly because I was kind of an asshole if I wasn't getting any writing in. She's like, "You need to go do something because you're really unpleasant right now." And usually it meant go write or go work out.
You're right. Right. I I I can relate to that. I can
Yeah.
relate.
Yeah.
You talk about different paths, or different trails taken. You took a trail in law enforcement for the better
Yes.
part of 2 decades.
Yeah. 26
Yeah,
years. Yeah.
26. Oh, excuse me, the better part of 3 decades.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
getting there, getting to that. So, yeah, I'm one of those people, like, if you give me a rope, I wanna be a cowboy,
Right.
and, uh, and so I've tried lots of things, and growing up, I was writing. I got really into ninjutsu because that was the big thing, and, and you wanted to
Right.
do karate and ninjutsu and music, so music hit me in my mid-teens, and we had garage bands, and I went off to LA to go to music school, but I wrote the whole time. And and when I came back, I was in college after I went to LA to be a musician and realized I was going to have to live in my car if I was going to actually do that. And I said, yeah, maybe
Right.
I'll go back and get some more schooling. And I eventually landed on a psychology degree instead of music. And um, but during that phase in college, I ran into a Marine recruiter and I was like, I am going into the Marines. This is what I want to do. And I gave it everything I had for a couple of years, and it was going along well. And they reviewed some of my medical stuff as I think they were doing some downsizing. They said, well, you have severe migraines and you're disqualified. And that was heartbreaking.
Man.
So I went in to be a school psychologist because through my mom's encouragement and stuff, working in education, she's like, that's a great job, pays really good right out of the gate. You have all your weekends and holidays off, summers off. You could write books. And I was like, that's what I'll do. So I went to graduate school. I worked security jobs because I'd been in the police reserves by that point. And I had a full-time job at the methadone clinic being a counselor there, which was
Mm.
full of characters to go into stories
Oh,
and
I'm
stuff like
sure.
that.
I'm
And
sure.
then my wife's like, "Hey, by the way, we're gonna have our first kid. You need a job right now." So I went back and I actually applied for the regular police department and got on, get some health benefits, and that's kind of where I went from there. But it became kind of my replacement for. It's not the same as going in the military, but I was like, well, maybe I could get on the SWAT team or do
Yeah.
some cool stuff. And eventually I did. Eventually I got on the SWAT team. I was on several tactical teams. I did some cool stuff as a detective, or not really cool, but important stuff as a detective. And
Yeah.
it was the whole conversation we're having about writing is all those life experiences are good if you're paying attention. So
Yes.
very early on, through the influence of my parents, I was like, if you want to be a writer, you got to be constantly looking at the world through a writer's eyes, picking up characters. How would I describe this? What's going on with this story? Or like I like art too. So drawing, if you're to be a sketch artist, you got to be always looking like, how would I draw that? Kind of, and so you get a lot more out of it when you do that sort of thing. So it became a really great thing for my writing, I think, but it also made things a lot more difficult as life does.
Yeah. I had a conversation at Author Nation this week, and we were talking about the fact that most people, when they get into writing, their dream is to one day do nothing but sit in my home office and write books and
Yes.
tell stories, and 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 that is a valid dream. That's don't hear me saying anything other than, if that's your dream, go for it. But what a lot of people lose track of is the fact that your day job provides so much for you in your author journey, that more than just taking the pressure of having to pay bills. That's an
Yes.
important one.
Mm.
But what it also does, and you hear this advice from so many people. They say, if you want to be a writer, you need to read a lot and you need to write a lot, and those things are absolutely important. But I like to add a third one to that, and you need to have conversations with people. You need to listen to people. You need to, like you said, it that these experiences you had were great fodder for writers if you're paying attention. Well, you need to get
Yes.
around people and you need to pay attention. And I would
Yeah.
imagine that a career in law enforcement is prime,
Oh,
a
yeah.
prime place to pay attention and pick up, you know, quirks of people, crazy circumstances. You see the best of people and you see the worst of people. I would imagine on a daily basis. I would
Well,
imagine that filled your author toolkit up.
yeah, I mean, and you're deep into people's lives, usually often in a moment of crisis, often when
Yeah,
they're coming to face hard truths or make hard decisions or lots of different things, and you have to have some empathy, and you
yeah,
have to, and you're constantly looking for motivation because why somebody did something really important. If you're putting together a criminal case or you're trying to figure out some other different types of things. And so you really have to, like, okay, this person is saying this. Why are they saying this? What are the circumstances? What's the big picture? A phrase in law enforcement that's used a lot to justify your actions is to the totality of the circumstances.
mm,
So it teaches that everything about this situation matters, and that's a good way to look at stuff. When you're trying to build a scene or build character motivation or different stuff, it's a good skill set.
yeah, yeah. B had a comment. I'm going to pop up here. I've gone
Yeah,
and sat at a big mall and just watched them, then made up stories about them. My way of writing without writing. I love that.
that's
Y-
great. People
yeah,
watching is big. My mom would talk about that. Her and her best friend, they sit on the porch sometimes and they'd people watch. And just sometimes you have snarky comments about what they might be doing, but most of the time you just people are interesting if you're paying attention.
yeah, yeah. And one of the best tools for a writer is the what if game. And you
Yeah.
watch someone and you pick up just a sliver of their conversation, and then the writer brain takes over and you start playing the what if game and expanding on that, and then all of a sudden you have a subplot for your book that you didn't even
Yeah.
expect to get.
Or whenever I'm not in the live chat, but I can see him kind of delayed here in StreamYard. The NJ West says I steal names from Starbucks orders sometimes.
Oh, that's
Finding character
fantastic.
names is very important
Yeah.
part of writing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, as as you were working your law enforcement job and continuing to write, was science fiction the genre that just kind of felt the most natural for you? Like how did you start kind of figuring out where your niche was and where your voice lent itself?
It's interesting because it's I think probably books and movies drew me into it. So I was going to say that I couldn't really remember how I got into sci-fi because I mostly wrote fantasy when I was getting really serious about it. Um, and then I did some of that, but like I'd always tell crazy cop stories at like social gatherings, and people are like, you should write
Yeah.
a book about that. And I'm like, well, but it's kind of personal, and you're talking about real people. And so eventually, I wrote my first cop story, or started writing cop stories after I'd been a cop for 10 years, 10 full years,
Mm.
full time. And then, but I was like, I don't really want people to think I'm writing about them. So let's put some dragons in there, and, some
Right.
demons and hellhounds and stuff to make sure they're clear. I'm not just swiping their stories off the street. But around that same time, I had watched, I think I'd watched Pitch Black, and I'd read a lot of sci-fi before that, obviously. But I decided to write a screenplay at one of my part-time jobs, and so I wrote the screenplay for what eventually became Enemy of Man while standing at Walmart. I'd work my regular shift, and then I'd go work security at Walmart for another 4 hours. And um, and there's a whole bunch of stories about working at Walmart. Trust me, where I was at. But
Yeah. Talk
some of
about the
my
best and
craziest
worst.
fights, foot chases, all came when I was off duty at Walmart. I'm like, what is this happening? Um, Like one night I'm standing there at like 3 in the morning talking to the manager, and the only other person is the clerk who's checking people out. And this guy comes up and just buys like your starter kit for making meth. And I'm watching him. I'm like, he's buying tubes and beakers and Sudafed. And this before all it was as regulated. And I was like, is this happening? Is he not seeing me? I'm standing right here. And then the clerk looks over at me with this kind of startled expression because of course the credit card was stolen and it flagged a stolen credit card. And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah. And then it just got dumb after that. So it's like, so anyway, like I said, a story within stories.
right.
But but so I wrote that screenplay, and then I realized screenplays are hard to do anything with, especially in Kansas at the time. And so I novelized it, and I started writing some science fiction, and I eventually self-published it. I learned about KDP and the self-publishing. My sister sent my mom and I an article, and I kind of didn't really do anything with it for like a year. I wish I'd started
Yeah.
a year earlier because I would have been part of that gold rush, but I didn't
Right.
quite do that. And then we can maybe talk more about that. We did some podcasting. I met a bunch of great writers, had some chance to collaborate, and then my sci-fi was able to take off because of the success of my collaborators, and that's why I'm where I'm at now, where I'm full time.
So around 2010, the uh, Amazon launches KDP. You know, they've come out with this device, the Kindle,
Yeah,
and
it costs like $130.
yeah, and it's going to be huge, but I think they realized pretty quickly that for this device to succeed, they need content for it. And they're convincing all the big publishers, that ebooks are going to be a thing. And then they say, well, you know what, we can launch our own publishing leg here, and maybe and I don't know, I've not talked to anyone at Amazon, but I can imagine that KDP came about as a way for them to prove to the big publishers that ebooks were going to be a thing. I can see it
Yeah.
being nothing more than that. And then it, got legs and became a thing and became what we know today. How long did it take for that to filter into you, someone that was already serious about writing? And then kind of what was that thought process like for you to realize, this is valid and this is something that I'm going to pursue?
So I'm looking up the author for this novel. I had been about that time, just maybe a year or so before that, I'd been reading this book called Writing the Breakout Novel, and it's by Donald Mass, and he was a big time agent,
Yeah.
literary agent at the time. And I read that book over and over again. And there was and basically the idea of writing the breakout novel, that book was writing the absolute best book you can is the main key to success. And
Yeah.
there was a chapter on ebooks, and it said, ebooks may become a thing, they may not. We're not really convinced it's going to be that much of a factor in the publishing world. So I was still very
Ah,
much in traditional pub. And that was probably 2008, 2009 ish. And I said 130, but I think that the first Kindle e-readers were way more than most people are going to spend,
I think you're
not
right.
knowing if you're going to, it was kind of like if you're a real tech person, you did all the cool tech stuff, but your average reader was not interested, I don't think.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, it wasn't really on my radar. And I got that article about KDP Select where you could publish your own stuff. And I just sat on the article. I literally had the article sitting there for like a year before I finally got around to really diving into it. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. And it was interesting in the beginning. I made lots of mistakes with marketing,
Yeah.
like
So
shotgun
did
marketing to
everybody.
everybody, telling everybody you know is a terrible idea because it messes up your algorithm. And
Yeah.
I did blog tours were the thing, but I didn't have time to do blog tours set up, so I pay for blog tour services. But
Mm,
those a lot of those bloggers were reading romance novels, and so my book was they'd read it and maybe leave a review or whatever their blog thing was. But Amazon was like, why are all these random people looking at these books? And I
right.
didn't know any better back then, but it probably did not help me. But I
Well,
did have a little bit of
that
success.
was when also bots were a thing where
Yeah,
you would where Amazon would organically populate
yep,
the also, you know, if you read this, people who read this also bought this. And
right.
now that's a thing that you pay for, but back then that mattered, you know, getting
It's a much newer
and
thing.
I remember people would launch a book and say, "Please buy my book and Ready Player One on launch day," or something, you know,
Yeah.
and people were having success with that. It was crazy,
There
you
was
know.
all kinds of weird hacks. Like one of the
Yeah,
books I read, one of the first books I read in marketing said, what you do is you read a book, you leave a review, and you mention your book in the review. And
yeah,
Amazon quickly put their foot down on that because people
right,
were doing that like crazy, and that
yeah,
was not what the reviews were there for.
right,
So a bunch of interesting things, and I learned a lot. And so things like 20 books or Author Nation as is now, and some other
yeah,
conferences were very critical to keeping me going because I think like anything that's this hard, there's lots of times when you want to give up.
sure.
And there was a couple of key moments there that did keep me going, and I'm glad that that happened. But yeah, and it just changes a lot, and it's changing faster and faster now, I feel
Yeah.
like.
You talked about your collaborations with other authors, and some of that was co-writing, but
Mhm.
some of that was just befriending people
Yes.
and finding your tribe of people that were like-minded, had like pursuits, that you could share information with, that you could
Yeah.
even just share encouragement with. A big thing for me, like 10 years ago when I first started publishing was it seemed like there were more anthologies then, and
Yes.
I got the opportunity to include some short stories in some anthologies, and that not only helped me in the Amazon algorithm to, you know, to be placed alongside some other names, but to get my work out there in front of people and to
Mhm.
connect me with people that, you know, you realize are have similar pursuits as you, and similar challenges, and uh, that's huge. Finding your community is huge,
Yeah.
especially for writers who tend to spend a lot of time alone, you know, just writing stories with the made up people in your head. Finding people that you can you know, share information with, encourage one another is massive.
Yeah. Well, and connecting with other writers is really important, and it's a super magical thing because
Yeah,
I mean, if you're like me, it's like you talked about the support, like everybody that I worked with pretty much knew that I was a writer for most of my career. I mean,
yeah,
I used to get up really early and write for like 2 hours before I went to the police academy every morning. And that took a lot of discipline, especially since we had a brand new baby. My son, my oldest kid was born the day before I started the police academy.
wow,
And in our academy, the first thing we did is we read the entire manual front to back as a group. And you talk about a snooze fest. And
Yeah,
so, you know, there I'd come in there with like 1 hour of sleep, and then we'd be taking turns reading this thing, and after I'm, you know, doing my writing, and it's quite a chore, but everybody knew. And so everybody was kind of supportive of it as I was, because like around 2006, I self-published some paperback versions on Lulu, which were
yeah,
hilarious to look at. What I did for art for covers was crazy. They made it like paint or something, you know.
yeah,
And but they all kind of also thought it was a joke. And so it was a friendly joke because cops hang a lot of shit on each other.
sure.
And if they're not, then it's probably means you're not really accepted in the group. But they would always be like saying something and like, is there going to be dragons in this? And I'm like, yeah, there's going to be dragons. Of course there is. But um, and so maybe not the most thing to be proud of, but there does come a point where you want people to know, no, I'm serious. And it's a little bit validating when you start to have like some serious success and they're like, oh, that's you're serious. You actually do write books. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
I write some books. And so it feels good. But I still don't think, even though I retired and went full time, I still feel like most of my peers in the police department are like, but are you really making any money? I don't think you
yeah,
really. I mean, it's nice, you know, whatever. Um, so they still don't really appreciate how much I put into this career. And it's
yeah,
fun sometimes to run into somebody that's like reading your book in the wild, or or somebody who's read it. And I did develop actually a few super fans at work that had read all my stuff, especially all the Reaper books with I did with Cheney, and they would come talk to me about them, and they're like, wow. And then when I became a supervisor, eventually I would put people in my books, like in my squad, and then I would kill them or something, or I'd use their name
yeah,
as a nickname. So I had some fun nicknames. I put them in there, and they love that. Most of them didn't read the books, but some of them
yeah,
did, and they got a
yeah.
kick out of it.
Do do you still have your parents, Scott?
Yes, yes, they're still
That
around.
did when they started seeing you have success, and since both of your parents were educators, did was
Yeah.
was that a point of pride for them?
They're My parents are just ridiculously proud of me at all points in my life, probably beyond anything they should be. But yeah, I think they're pretty proud of it. You know, my dad reads all my books, and my mom listens to them on audiobook 'cause she's insanely busy. She's like on her fourth retirement, but she just keeps working, and so she's always driving and doing stuff. And she really likes audiobooks. But they obviously think I'm the greatest writer alive.
I
So I
I
try not to
love it.
argue with them too much.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. That's wonderful.
You do have
Speaking
a
of
question.
audiobook, when uh, publishing has changed a lot in the last, you know, however long that you've been involved in it. Books on tape were a thing, have been forever.
Oh, I love
Um,
it.
but it was it's a bit of a niche thing, for folks to you had to really want an audiobook to get
Yeah.
either the book on tape or CD or whatever. Well, now that smartphones are as advanced as they are, I'm literally walking around with probably 30 audiobooks on my
Oh,
phone
you bet.
right now, at least. And
Oh,
audiobook publishing has really become a thing. How have you seen this change and kind of how publishing went from ebooks to now audiobooks are the biggest growth market, and how has that affected you, and has it changed the way you write stories, knowing that audio is going to be a big player in how your books are consumed?
yeah. So I love audiobooks. I grew up with cassette tape audiobooks and then
Yeah,
CDs. And this is a little bit of an aside to that. I'll lead into answering the question.
sure.
But one of the things about audiobooks, you know, in the 80s and 90s and beyond, is that you kind of had to take whatever you got because they're expensive, they're hard to find. And so somebody gave me, like, I listened to an audiobook called Fate is the Hunter by Ernest K. Gann, and I can't find it now, but I'd probably listened to it 4 times. And it's about a guy, it's about a pilot, and it was just so magical. I would have never have went out and picked that one out. Or I read lots of Stephen King because a lot of Stephen King. I read all the Master or listened to all the Master and Commander stuff because those were
Yeah,
available, um, and so on. So that's really good. Now, audiobooks have changed. Audiobooks are important. They're not going to be the bulk of most people's income, although some people do really well in them. But they are a significant source of income once you latch into them, because they cost more, and nobody sells an audiobook for 99 cents.
sure.
Uh, Most people will need some sort of publisher to do it, although you can do through ACX, through different methods. You can do royalty share, you can pay. Royalty shares are generally a bad idea for several reasons we could get into later, um, because I've done both. But so writing for audiobooks, I do write for audiobooks, for several reasons and several very specific things. So, like, I'm very firmly believe that as dialogue tags, you should just use said or asked. That's the way I grew up. That's why I was trained. That's the way a lot of my favorite authors do. But in an audiobook, if you have lots of characters in a scene or a lot of back and forth, that can become really heavy on the ear. And so
Right.
you have to figure out a way to not need the dialogue tags through how you structure the store, the conversation. So I actually listen to my books through. You can either do it with your swiping on your iPhone if you have one, which I did for a long time, or I'll use an app like Speechify or something to read my books back to me as part of my editing process. And it helps me catch a lot of typos, and it helps me go, man, that's really repetitive. That word is so
Mm,
repetitive. When I write it, like the word asked or he said or he asked or she said she asked, when you read it as a reader, it's like a period. You barely even notice it. But when
right.
somebody reads it to you, it can really pound you in the ears. So you have to write a little bit differently for audiobook. And that's kind of a long answer to say that, yes, I definitely consider the audiobook when I write my stories. I think it makes them better in general.
Yeah, yeah. And someone told me one time that when you're editing a book, when your eye sees the same thing, three or
Mhm.
five times, whatever it is, that after you've seen it that many times, it just disappears to you. You will no longer see that
Yeah,
typo,
it's easy
whatever.
to miss.
And yeah, and I would imagine the dialogue tags are the same way. Once you've gone through
Yep.
one page and they just disappear, and
Well, and listening to your stuff back, if you're an audio learning person like me,
yeah,
it really can give you a different feel for your story. You can feel the pacing. I wouldn't mind answering Valentine's
yeah. I was
question.
gonna pop that up and just say about the police procedurals. Yeah. I'm writing a mystery that touches very lightly on police procedure, and I'm not sure how to figure out how to make it realistic. How might I go about it? What advice do you have for that, Scott?
So I guess the key things on that, one is just not to overdo it. A good way to do it is if you're able to do like some ride-alongs, you go on a police ride-along or two. That's usually pretty good advice. Reading the genre is pretty helpful, but cops have certain key things, that they like, kind of like slang they use or dialogue, or just pick a couple of things that are important to the police procedure and kind of stick to those, and those will go a long ways. Trying to do a bullet point check by check thing of all the procedure will be pretty tedious in most cases. But the best way I'd be is talk to and police officers and detectives. They'd be more than happy to talk to you about that stuff. So make a friend, buy somebody some coffee, ask them. You can just tell them, say, I'm writing a story. I want to write a police procedural, how to make it realistic. And here's some coffee I bought you. Although they probably don't need it because they mostly get coffee for free every place. Um,
Right.
but they like to talk. Most cops are talkers, and if you make a friend, they'll be able to tell you some stories, and just roll a little bit of it in there, but just kind of don't go too heavy on it. I guess
Yeah.
that's what I would do.
Gotcha. You mentioned Cheney a minute ago. Jeff Cheney or J.N. Cheney is a fellow writer who a few years ago um, really started um, an interesting form of publishing where he co-writes or co-publishes with different writers, and really what he's doing is he has started a publishing house of his own, and the way he's doing it is by co-publishing with folks. You can
Yes.
better explain kind of the way that works, but from traditional publishing being the only way to indie publishing coming in, now we're starting to see some small presses that are coming up, folks that are very indie minded, but have seen the value in structuring a business more like the traditional publishing model, but while also staying nimble enough to to not get bogged down in the giant machinery of some of these traditional publishers that have been around for 100 years or more. And
Yeah.
you can just imagine all of the stuff that is collected with a business that has run that long and that has all sorts of agendas other than just publishing books.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with Jeff, and how are you seeing kind of this new wave of people that are kind of have a foot in each world and taking advantage of all the good parts of each?
So one of my apps started jumping at me. It's like literally jumping up. It's like, what do you want? It's like my Photoshop has to go out to the out like my dog going to the bathroom or something. It's like I need to go out. I don't know what that was, but so answering your question is so I've done collaborative writing with Jeff Cheney or Jay and Cheney. If you search on Amazon for his books, you only find it through Jay and Cheney. Jeff, he doesn't
Yeah,
go by Jeff for that. So Cheney, Craig Martell, which a lot of people are probably going to know who that is. He gave me
yeah,
one of my early starts, and Richard Fox, and all three of them shared one thing in common: how this model generally works. And I think it probably happens in most genres. There's somebody who's doing it, and basically, Jeff Cheney wrote Renegade Star, which just went crazy. And he
yeah,
did a lot of things right with his marketing. He was writing to market for that in that case. And he's one of those guys who was in the Air Force and got his MFA in creative writing as a good writer. And he's very focused. He had a very good success with that series. And he got to a point, as did Craig Martell and Richard Fox in their stories, where they're like, I can't write these books fast enough. My
yeah,
readers want them faster than I can write them. Would you team up with me and we'll write more books and we'll make more money and then we'll all be happy and dance off to magical author land. And that's basically how those things start. And so I did those things and I've spent the most time with Cheney in his books, and he is extremely good at marketing. He has a massively large following of very engaged readers. And so those are all key things like a lot of traditional publishers don't have. And he has a very small group of writers that help him write these books. And and so I say all that to say is that just collaborating with somebody randomly is not generally a good idea. You need to
right,
have people on both sides of the partnership that bring something to the table, and at least one
sure,
of them has to know how to market and have a budget to market. And if you can get those things, then you can. There's a lot of opportunity going that way.
yeah.
And that's and there's also some small presses like Athon is very good, and there's others I'm sure, but I just haven't worked with them, and they're more indie minded as well. But I've been very fortunate in who I've worked with so far.
What's the collaboration process like? For I think that's one thing that people have a very difficult time because storytelling is one of these things that you get very precious about your ideas,
Yes,
and it's hard for a lot of people to take input from someone else or to think of their story in a way that's kind of bigger than their ideas. Is it difficult when you first start collaborating with someone to kind of learn where that give and take is, where the ebb and flow of story creation is?
I think one of the best ways to do that is to write a short story together. So maybe you should date your partner before you marry him. Um, I do know some people that jumped in and committed to kind of there was kind of a Wild West of collaborations where you
Yeah.
had that gold rush of you could literally do everything wrong and still make money writing
Right.
ebooks back in like 2012, 2013 era. And and then when collaborations like the ones I just described got big, people were just going crazy. And like publishers and audiobook people would be like, "Oh, you guys are going to collaborate? You're both pretty good. You've got some good successes. We're going to give you money." And so they would
Mhm.
give advances. And I've known several people who have jumped onto that bandwagon, but they hadn't really tested their collaboration yet.
Yeah.
And that's usually a recipe for misery. So a good way to do is to collaborate on a short story, maybe something for an anthology. Anthologies, I think, are best for meeting collaborators, networking, just raw expression of ideas. In my opinion, anthologies is not a great way to make a lot of money, but they
Right.
are very important. Like I was able to get my collaboration with Craig Martell because I wrote stories for his anthology, and he's like, you don't completely suck. Let's talk about collaborating. And we did, and we wrote Darklanding, and it's still one of my favorite ones, and it's very popular for the people who know anything about it. Um, so yeah, so that's the best way, and every collaboration is different. And I think you need to define what you expect out of a collaboration. It's generally good if you have a senior partner, somebody gets to make the final decisions, and
Yeah.
it's just accepted this person will have the final say. So you don't have to argue about whose precious idea goes in there. And, collaboration might mean one person outlines, one person writes. It might mean I write a chapter and send you my chapter, and then you write the next chapter, and we go back and forth. Um, with when I wrote with Richard Fox, he was very, very keen to keep his voice true to how he wrote books because he had a very specific reader group, and they wanted
Right.
Richard Fox. And so when I wrote with him, it needed to match. And that's usually not too bad, not because I've written so much, so many millions and millions of words that I can usually mimic my way in pretty good.
Yeah.
I count. I was looking at my lifetime word count right now, and it's like stupidly high how many words I've written since I started. But but I remember I would write a chapter and send it to him. I write like 6,000 words and send it to him. He'd be like, "No," and like, "What?" And then I have to just write it over. He'd be like, "Nah, we're not doing that anymore." And so I'd have to, in 6,000 words, that can be several days of work, especially if
Y-
you're still working your regular day job.
Right.
Uh, but you had to just keep on trucking. And I learned a lot from all my collaborators. So that's also a good thing too. If you're open to it, you can learn from anybody.
Right.
Uh, and so yeah, that's my base thing is to test the waters and be careful about writing with spouses or close friends because it could be a good way to end those relationships. You take the most important core of your soul, your creative spirit, and your stories, and then you realize that the other person doesn't like it so much or they have criticisms. I would be careful. Proceed with
Yeah.
caution on that. And you
Yeah.
can make friendships through collaborations, but be really careful about collaborating with your best friend because it may not work.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you have to understand that people arrive at their story ideas differently.
Oh
So
yes.
my wife and I have completely different creative processes, and
Mhm.
we arrive at a similar product at the end, but the early stages of how you get there can lead to divorce if you're
Yeah.
not careful.
Yeah.
Oh man, but
Well, it's like
over
so
the
Jane. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I say so Cheney, he is a very high concept type of guy, and we'll be kicking around ideas, and we'll go through these concepts. And most of the things I've written with him, took several tries before we landed on what we were doing, um, and that's great. And most of my friends are. Josh Hayes is a meticulous, idea centered, detailed plot everything out. He's a hardcore plotter, as you probably know. But I'm like, that's a cool book cover. I think I could write a book on that. And so, like, I'll look at pre-made book covers. I'm like, that's like my current book, Boots Down. I'm like, I bought that as a pre-made book cover because it was on sale. And then I was like, I need a story for this, and off we go.
I
So it doesn't
love
take
that.
doesn't take much to send me down a rabbit hole.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that was where I was going with that question was over the the 3 decades or so that you've been writing, like how has your creative process changed? And do you think of a story, in the like for me, a lot of times I'll have a character that just walks onto the stage in my mind and I'm like,
Mhm.
who are you? What are you doing? And I start playing the what if game. And then a lot of times I'll write a couple of chapters of just who these people are, what they're doing. Maybe if there's two of them, conversations that happen, and I kind of figure out what the book is by kind of writing it. And then
Yeah,
because of my friendship with Josh, I then go through a whole planning process of the book because it took me years of him wearing me down to get me to
right,
that
as he
point.
does.
Um,
He's very
yeah,
he's
yeah,
an evangelist for the plotting for sure.
he is. Well, evangelist is a nice. I was going to use a different adjective, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but a lot of times, like I'll have no idea who these people are, what they're about, but I'll start kind of exploring them and then figure it out and then plan the book out. Over
Yeah.
your decades of writing, how has your creative process changed? Do you get into a book the same way that you always have, or and are there parts of your process that have streamlined, or is it just controlled chaos?
Yes to all of that. So,
Yeah.
um, I have several ways I get into them, and I never do the same one twice. Like, and I'll have like a template for my outline, but I change it all the time, so it's never the same template. So it's not really a template. Kind of, kind of dumb. But
It's a good
like,
jumping
I,
off point.
yeah, I like to have an idea of the character. Usually, have some sort of premise or setting or combination, and a problem. It's always good to
Yeah.
at least start with a problem and stuff like that. But sometimes I have an idea, when I learned that Josh was working with Cheney, I was like, I want to work for Cheney too. Even though I just said I wasn't going to do collaboration for a while, and I was laying in bed and I was just thinking, well, what type of story do I want to write? And so my idea was like, what would you do? And this was a very visual setting or premise type thing that when I started developing was like, imagine a decommissioned Death Star. So you
Mm.
got the Death Star, and it's like not really that useful anymore. And so they decommissioned it, kind of like you would a big naval ship, and you got to do something with this thing. And so I imagine this big kind of vacant, massive space structure, and then I start going, okay, well that sounds a lot like you could do Escape from New York on a Death Star in space. And so I thought about it. Next day, I called Cheney and we talked through it, and I gave him ideas, and he's like, "Yeah, and you should have this like cyborg that's got to like lose his arm to be part of this elite cyborg corps. They got to like voluntarily give up a body part to become this cyborg." And we started riffing on that. And then we go, okay, so we talked for a while, and then I wrote, and this is the most detailed outline I've ever written. I wrote the entire outline for the Last Reaper in a 6-hour stretch without stopping. And then I gave it to Cheney, and then we tweaked it and adjusted it, and we changed some things, made me change some character names, and so on. And then I just went to town on it, and then we went through all the editing process. So that's one where I kind of thought through the idea and the premise, and then did an outline and just went. There's a really good book called I think Story Engineering. I think it's by Larry Brooks, and it breaks down the outlining process into 4 sections in it. 425, so you have the beginning, middle, and end, but the middle is actually longer than the beginning and the end. And there's a first plot point, a midpoint, and a second plot point that are really important. And I always try to keep those things in mind. But when I do outline, I normally only outline like the first half of the book because it changes so much by the time I get to the second half. I have to re-outline it anyway. So that's kind of my general process. But I was a definite discovery writer or pantser
Yeah.
in the early days for years and years. And so I will try to respect the advice of Josh Hayes, but a lot of times I start going down the rabbit holes. Um, there's another book, I think it's by Stephen James, called Story Trump Structure.
Yes.
And in that book, it basically says, what would your characters logically do next, or what would their characters emotionally do next? And it basically is like you have to respect that regardless of your plot. And so I also follow that. And in that book, it says, go down the rabbit holes, chase all those crazy ideas, and just figure out what to do with them when you get there. And that's also good.
Right.
Just mixing it
Yeah.
all up.
Um, that the who I'm drawing a blank now, but the writing into the dark.
Yeah, I
Oh,
know you're talking about. Dang it.
yeah,
And he's written so much.
yeah, yeah, so very much. Yeah, yeah, similar kind of thing. Scott, when we were kind of joking right before we went on the air that on your Amazon page, you've got like 6 books up for pre-order. Um, right now, that's insane. Like
Yes.
your output since you retired from the police force and went full-time writing, y- some people lament that when you go full-time with anything that their writing time seems to be the same as it always was. Their day just fills up with all the other stuff.
Or
How
worse.
do you yeah, how do you maintain your writing time so that all the business of writing doesn't creep in and fill it up?
The best way that I've found is to do it first. And it sounds dumb, but you need to consciously remind yourself that this is the most important thing I'm going to do
Right,
today,
right,
barring, somebody's on fire or something. It,
right.
you got to be pretty hardcore about it. You need to have straight talks with people around you, um, and and you need to enforce it too. So like my family, my wife and my kids and stuff, they'll say, hey, how's your writing going? Before they want to ask me to do something, they'll always ask me that question. And so they've done their part in respecting my time. But I'm such a pleaser that I'm like, no, it's good. And then I'll go do something with them, even though I know that I haven't got my words in. So you
Mm.
have to stay vigilant. But it really does you have to be a little bit crazy about it if you're going to protect it, because when you go full time or it, you'll be amazed at how fast that time slips through your fingers. It's ridiculous. I mean, when I was a first shift sergeant, I got up at 3 a.m. I wrote for 2 hours so that I could be at work at 6:30 to start my day. And I did that religiously. And that was very exhausting, but that's some of my best, most productive times because nobody is there to bother you at 3 a.m.
Right.
Assuming you can drink enough coffee to get cruising. But
Yeah,
now I'm older. I've abused my body so much with all my night shift and call outs and stuff that now I wake up when I wake up,
yeah.
which is still pretty early. But like I haven't written yet today, and
Mm,
I'm a little get anxious and nervous. But after we get done, I'm going to write some and I'll do some of my marketing and businessy stuff. Um, but yeah, so the big thing is once you even people that mean well in your family and people around you, they the way they see it is you got all day and they will
right.
ask you to do things, and even if it's a small thing. So like I like to say, every time somebody asks you to do something, it takes twice as much time out of your writing as they think. So like,
Yeah.
hey, can you you know change this rug around, it'll take 15 minutes. Well, that takes me 45 minutes because I've lost time at the before and after. Because first I broke out of my flow. I do the thing. Now you get back into my flow, and who knows what else I have to do because now I got to make myself a new cup of coffee. Got to go to the bathroom. Now my feet hurt. I got to stretch, and so you lose a lot of time every time you're interrupted, even for anytime somebody does that. So you have to be protective. Your time will rapidly slip away. The last thing I
Right.
want to say on that, and I know I'm kind of rambling, is that I read a bunch of science of the I'm into psychology and stuff, but creatively, most people have about 4 hours total that you can give really high quality work. So when
Right.
you say you're going to write for 10 hours, really only the first four of those are going to be your best. And if you spend the first four mowing the yard or fixing the Christmas lights, now you're going to come in with the 50% effective brain
Mm,
power to write the rest of the day, and it's not a good trade.
right.
So that's
Right.
why I say if you can do it first. Some people I know really like to write at night after everything's kind of calmed down, but I'm ready to go to bed. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
right.
old and I'm like it's 9:30. I'm up like 3 hours past my bedtime. It's time to start shutting it down.
Right. NJ, I see your question about advertising self-published works. We're gonna have some content about that coming up. Doug and I are going to talk about that. Um, that's a deeper question than
Yeah.
we had time for today, but we will definitely revisit that. Scott, I know we're holding you from your writing time today. If people want to dig into your work, our friend Rick Partlow would tell you that if you want to get into his writing, read his newest book that came out. If someone wanted to get into Scott Moon's back catalog or wanted to jump in and get a feel for what you do, and where's the best on ramp for them if they want to get involved in your writing?
So since I'm a pushy and horrible person, I'll say you have to read 2 things. I'm kidding. Kind of kidding. Not kidding. So I recently wrote a novella. It's a longer novella. It's like 33,000 words, and it's called Salvager. So, and it's a sci-fi story. I think it's doing pretty well. I think people like it, and it's a fun read, and it's a short time commitment, comparatively speaking. So I would
Yeah,
say go check out Salvager. But the book that it introduces is called Boots Down, and it's connected to that. It's in the same world, not quite the same characters, um, but I'd really like people to check that out too. And I'm very happy with the way those turned out. So probably one of those two would be a good place to start.
excellent. We'll link those up in the show notes as well to make it easy for folks to find. Scott, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. We could talk for hours, but you've got stuff to do. You've got worlds to write and stuff. It is your we'll link up your Amazon page as well. Is that the best place for folks to find
It,
is
it's
there
not the
another
most
link?
intuitive place because Amazon organizes it the way Amazon does, but you can
Yes,
go
it does.
there. If you want to go to my webpage, it's scottmoonwriter.com. And so that's not bad either. But, I'll be appreciative of any attention people want to give them, wherever they
Absolutely.
find it.
We'll link it up and get folks over to see you. Scott, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks, Hank. Appreciate it.